very good to have you. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me back.
So what do you make of this, and whether holding her in contempt will even get her to talk? A lot of lawyers tell me, I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched a lot of legal shows, so I think I qualify as an expert, that there is no way in heck she is going to talk, contempt or not.
That may be, but I think that as a public official in such an important post, she has an obligation to share the truth with Congress and her role that she's played, and the bottom line is that she's refused to comply. In fact, the entire administration has stonewalled this. This is a legitimate issue. You have one of the most powerful, the scariest agencies in American government who targeted individuals because of their political positions. Every day new information emerges to show that, and she refuses to cooperate. And not only does she refuse to cooperate, but the administration refuses to cooperate. So I don't know how the vote's going to turn out, but I suspect that in fact she will be held in contempt because of it.
All right, between this and Benghazi and a lot of follow-through, do you suspect, as some other Republicans have told me, Senator, that the administration is just trying to run out the clock here?
It may very well be. Look, I think they've largely had a disregard for the process. They've had a large disregard for Congress and for the role that the legislative branch plays. And in many instances, I think you've seen that permeate throughout the administration, the sense that they're above the law. Whether it's in response to Benghazi, which we now see was clearly filled with inaccuracies that were deliberately done for political purposes, or in the IRS investigation, where instead of holding someone accountable, they continue to stonewall. I think this may very well be an effort to run out the clock, but I don't think that's going to work. The American people are aware of it. I think these issues are going to continue to linger, even perhaps beyond this presidency.
Switching gears, if you don't mind, Senator, Ukraine and what's going on there now. I've talked to a lot of oil company CEOs and the like who are urging the administration to cool it on sanctions that could boomerang back on them. For example, ExxonMobil with oil contracts they have in Russia, banks with commitments they have in Russia. Do you think that's the problem? That whatever we advise, the fear seems to be that it boomerangs on us, and that's going to hold us back?
Look, I think that by and large instability is going to have a detrimental impact on our economy, but instability is what the Russians are creating. It's very simple. Ukraine decided that it wanted to turn towards the West and towards the European Union for more commerce and more trade. Russia decided that was unacceptable, and they've taken these measures. They continue to take these measures by the administration's own admission. So now the question for American policymakers is, what do we do in response? How can we change the cost-benefit analysis so that Vladimir Putin and those that surround him understand that the costs of doing this outweigh the benefits, and more importantly, so that other leaders around the world who are contemplating similar actions in the future understand that these things cannot be done with impunity?
All right, so if you were president, Senator, would you put American lives on the line over Ukraine?
Yeah, I don't think anyone is suggesting that American troops need to be deployed to Ukraine. I thought we should have been quite forceful when this was about Crimea. It is now about eastern Ukraine. If you notice, the issue of Crimea has already been given up on. And the fact of the matter is that these sanctions, these sectoral sanctions that the White House is waiting to impose until Russia does something new that's wrong, they should have been imposed before. I don't think the Russians believe America will do it. They watch these news reports. They hear these voices coming out of the administration. They do not believe that any of the costs we will impose will outweigh the benefits of what they're contemplating.
So you would toughen up the sanctions, the economic sanctions,
Absolutely.
Regardless of what oil companies here fear or banks fear?
No doubt about it, because the number one obligation of the President of the United States is the national security and the economic interests of the country, not just of any individual companies that happen to operate in the country.
Senator, knowing that you were going to be here, I was intrigued by comments a fellow Charlie Crist was making on another network concerning his tit-for-tat with you and his own prospects now to become maybe governor again of Florida. I want you to listen to this and react to this.
The moment in which you decided just to leave the Republican Party was because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, it was because I couldn't be consistent with myself and my core beliefs and stay with a party that was so unfriendly toward the African-American president. I'll just go there. Because I was a Republican and I saw the activists and what they were doing, it was intolerable to me.
What did you think of that?
I think it's ridiculous and silly. 2 points I would make. First of all, I'm even cautious to even dignify that with a serious response. My prediction is that by the end of this election, even Democrats will be embarrassed that Charlie Crist became a Democrat. But I would say if this was in fact how he felt at the time, why didn't he say it? Why didn't he say, I'm not running as a Republican because I think the Republican Party has become what he accuses it of becoming? And why didn't he switch to Democrat? Why did he run as an independent? Why didn't he do that at the time? Why did it take him 4 years to say what he's saying? It's just not a serious thing. That's my second. I've never met a single Republican activist involved in my campaign that has ever, in my opinion, ever been motivated by race to state their objections. I think it's absurd, and quite frankly, it's barely worthy of any sort of response. But because he's running for governor of my state, I guess I need to say what I've said.
You think he's a phony?
Absolutely. I believe that during the campaign. It's one of the reasons why I ran for the U.S. Senate. I didn't want my next U.S. Senator to be someone like that, who wouldn't just be trustworthy in moments of importance to the country, but who would embarrass us by saying these sorts of ridiculous things.
Well, if he's a phony, he leads in the polls. It's still early. What do you make of that?
He led in the polls against me, too.
I
was at 3% at one point. So I think once people start to focus in on there's a race and they realize it's the same Charlie Crist that's running, that there's actually the same guy who's been basically on every side of every single issue before the country and the state, I think those numbers are going to change dramatically.
How do you classify yourself? I remember in that race, Tea Partiers quickly took a liking to you. Many are saying the mainstream Republican Party, for whatever that's worth, Senator, has not taken a liking to them and wants to keep focused on winning. And they think that some of these mainstream candidates, as was the case in North Carolina, they can do just that. What do you think of that?
I think a lot of it is a media creation. I mean, the media is always looking for conflict. That's what drives ratings. That's what sells newspapers. That's what gets clicks to online forums.
I don't understand what you mean by that. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, not your program, but most programs are about that. And but I would say this about it. Look, the Republican Party is the conservative. It's the home of conservatives in America. It's the home of those of us who believe in limited government and a free enterprise. You can't, it's very difficult for someone who believes in these principles to be a Democrat because there's no space for you in that party. They're intolerant towards views that support free enterprise, limited government, the Second Amendment, and these sorts of issues. So
you're saying the Republican Party itself, regardless of divisions within some sects, is tolerant of other views?
Yeah, the Republican Party is the only major political party in America that has a vibrant debate on virtually every issue. But at the end of the day, it is primarily and at its core a limited government, free enterprise party. And most of these arguments, if you want to call it that, are usually about tactics. They're not about what we should stand for. I understand it,
but when Rick Santorum says of a Rand Paul that it's not a libertarian party, it's a conservative party, what did you make of that?
Well, you'll have to ask Rick what he meant by it. I think, if I were to guess, and what someone would say is on the issues, for example, of foreign policy, I continue to believe that the Republican Party is the party of a robust foreign policy that acts always and foremost in the interests of our nation and of our principles, one that understands that American leadership is indispensable in the world. Obviously, Senator Paul has some different views on some different issues, and perhaps that's what Rick was talking about, but I would just say that in our party we have a lot of different views on a lot of different issues, and I think that debate will make us stronger and more representative of the country as a whole.
Senator, very good seeing you again. Senator Marco Rubio.
You.